Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, structural shift in how our world actually operates. We traditionally think of power purely in terms of presidents, prime ministers, and parliaments, but the reality of our modern era is that power is increasingly concentrated, systematically, and deliberately within global corporate structures. It's literally staggering when you stop and think about it for a second. Some of the modern corporations we interact with every single day actually employ more people than entire governments. They command and control global supply chains that are vastly larger and way more complex than those of entire nation-states.
And because of that immense scale, these entities have this profound ability to shape policy and influence our laws. And they do it without ever appearing on a political ballot. You can't exactly vote a multinational supply chain into office, right? And you definitely can't vote it out. Yet their decisions constantly ripple through our public life and our daily routines.
But here's the absolute wildest part. This monumental shift in power, this subtle transfer of authority from traditional states to borderless corporations, is happening incredibly quietly. It's systematic, and it is completely global.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Here is our global tour for today. We'll start with the anatomy of power, then move to the US, China, EU, and Africa models, before concluding with borderless sovereignty. By the end of this, we're going to completely transition our mindset from asking who governs to who really shapes governance. Section 1. Anatomy of power. When companies become systems. You see, a corporation usually starts out pretty simply, just a business trying to sell a product or a service. But when it hits a certain immense scale, it essentially transforms into a borderless institution. It practically develops its own internal government. We can see that institutional power operating through capital, employment, technology, infrastructure, and political access. The crucial dynamic here is that the larger a company gets, the more it leverages these specific, highly powerful tools to shape the environment around it. It's really not just about making a profit anymore. It's about deploying tech and controlling critical infrastructure to lock in a foundational role in society.
Now, what's really interesting about this setup is that while ownership might be widely scattered among millions of everyday shareholders like you and me, the actual control concentrates in a very small, very tight circle. That authority rests with the board of directors and executive leadership, and then it flows downward through complex layers of subsidiaries and lobbying arms. Take an entity like BlackRock, for example. They aren't manufacturing physical products on an assembly line. Instead, they influence entire global industries simply by holding strategic ownership stakes across multiple sectors. So the power is highly concentrated by design.
Section 2. The U.S. model. Formalized influence.
So transitioning over to the United States for our first geographic case study, we can observe exactly how influence is formalized in places like Washington, D.C. You have these massive foundational sectors: technology, healthcare, energy, and defense. And these are dominated by giant corporate entities like Amazon, Google, and Pfizer. They utilize specific legal funding methods like policy research, campaign support, and industry advocacy. Stepping back impartially for a second, critics strongly argue that the system allows corporations to unfairly shape public policy to their benefit. Supporters, on the exact other hand, argue that they're simply and legally protecting their legitimate business interests. But regardless of where you stand on that debate, the objective reality we can see is that economic scale undeniably creates direct political access.
Section 3. The China model. State-corporate fusion.
And this brilliantly illustrates a totally different architecture of power. Jumping straight over to Shenzhen, we see that while the U.S. model relies heavily on formalized lobbying, where corporations sometimes challenge or push the state for favorable policies, the China model is defined by state-corporate fusion. Companies grow alongside the state, not against it. Megafirms like Tencent, Alibaba, and Huawei aren't typically lobbying against government policy. Instead, their massive corporate growth directly aligns with, and actually strengthens, the overarching national strategy.
Here's exactly how that Chinese power integrates: through unified industrial policy, rapid technology development, massive infrastructure exports, and vast digital data ecosystems. The truly fascinating thing to take away from this specific model is that the question isn't if corporations influence the state. The deeper question is how the state and these massive corporations mutually reinforce each other to project power globally.
Section 4. The EU model, the regulator. Moving our tour over to Brussels, we run into a stark contrast. Compared to that corporate partner approach of mutual growth and alignment, the European Union acts much more like a strict referee. Neutrally speaking, The European Commission uses specific tools like competition law, stringent privacy rules, and aggressive digital regulation to attempt to set boundaries for global giants like Meta and Apple. It's an ongoing, absolutely fascinating test of leverage. Can a regional government body still effectively regulate and rein in truly borderless global corporate power?
Section 5. The Africa Model. Resource-linked leverage.
Shifting our focus to the African continent, we find a highly complex dual-sided dynamic where the architecture of corporate power is heavily anchored to natural resources. On one side, you have vital local employment and necessary infrastructure development. But on the other side, we see external ownership, massive foreign extraction, and deep infrastructure dependency. Entities like Shell, Glencore, and the MTN Group operate extensively in oil, minerals, and telecommunications here. Objectively framing this, these corporations absolutely bring crucial, undeniable investment to many nations that desperately need it. But simultaneously, their massive presence can deepen external economic dependence and lead to prolonged, complicated tax disputes. The ultimate challenge here is figuring out who actually benefits the most from their presence.
Section 6. Borderless sovereignty. Power without borders.
Pulling all these regional variations together, notice these specific borderless capabilities. Corporations can move capital globally in literally a matter of milliseconds. They can shift production from one continent to another. They can relocate operations entirely to optimize their tax environments. And they can influence multiple sovereign governments at the exact same time. This is what you really need to take away from this entire explainer. Governments are strictly limited by the hard geographic lines of their borders. Corporate networks are not. They operate beside, around, and straight through those borders.
So, the crucial point is this. In the modern world, scale itself can become a form of sovereignty. Just think about the weight of that statement for a second. When a corporation becomes large enough, when its networks are vast enough, it essentially wields a type of global authority that genuinely rivals traditional nation-states. Corporate power doesn't necessarily replace governments, but it certainly commands its own unique domain of power right alongside them.
Which leads us to our final lingering thought. When massive institutions, entities that are driven fundamentally by profit, grow to a scale where they directly shape our public life, our policies, and our global infrastructure, who is power ultimately designed to serve? I really want you to think about that question the next time you tap by, use a digital service, or head to the ballot box. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.